everyone, so this is a video for English Language Paper 1, Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. We're going to continue with the Section A questions. This time we're going to move on to question 4. Just a reminder for you, there are no tiers on this paper, there's no higher or foundation, which means that everybody's assessed using the increasing complexity of skills. So we start easy with the list 4 things question, just retrieving the information. It gets progressively more challenging with analysing the language, more challenging again with analysing the structure, which tends to be a bit more challenging in terms of the devices and ones that you probably haven't encountered until GCSE. And then finally, question 4 brings all of that together. We evaluate a statement we're given about the text, deciding whether we agree or disagree, and we relate that to the writer's methods, how that effect has been created using language devices or structural devices. So we're going to look at question 4 today. The most important thing to remember about question 4 is that it is a heavy hitter. I mean it's a heavy hitter by the sense that it can totally alter the grade that you get overall based on how you do on this question. It is the most important question in the whole of Section A that you get correct. In particular, it's worth 20 out of 40 marks. So it can mean the difference of a whole grade if you, for instance, miss this question or only partially answer this question or don't give yourself enough time to answer it. So it's really important that we think about timing. We need to leave about 25 minutes to answer this particular question, and we need to spend time writing about 4 paragraphs. Now we can see that questions 1, 2 and 3 put together are worth 20 marks, and question 4 on its own is worth 20 marks. So it's important that you spend about 25 minutes writing up your answers to question 1, question 2 and question 3, and about 25 minutes writing up your answer to question 4. So our learning objective today is to revise how to evaluate a statement about a text by considering the writer's use of methods, language and structure. This is AO4, which is an evaluation assessment objective, but it's also AO2, which we looked at last lesson in the sense that we're looking at methods, we're looking at the writer's use of structure, the writer's use of language devices. The key thing to remember on this question as well is that the questions here are always marked by different examiners. So if you want to use structural devices that you already mentioned in question 3, you can do here. You can use the same quotations. You just need to make sure that they're worked to the keyword that you're given for question 4. So don't worry about repeating quotations from earlier on, provided it's within the section you are asked to quote from. So this lesson you want to think about how well you can do these skills, because these are the key to success. So can I evaluate a statement by giving my opinion and the reasons to support it? Yes, I agree that this section of the text is tense, for instance, because the writer uses short sentences or uses sensory details or something like that. I need also to be able to identify the writer's use of language or structure devices using correct terminology. I need also to be able to select quotations, including those single words, those micro quotations, to be more judicious in my selection of evidence. And I also want to be able to write detailed, specific effects on the reader. I don't want to be saying vague things like makes it flow, tells us what's happening, makes the reader read on. It needs to be specific and it must link to the keywords that you are evaluating. So the evaluation question is going to look something like this. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line X, line whatever, to the end. You need to find that line reference and box it off. It gives you a statement said by a student or a reviewer or somebody who has read the text, and you are given the question, to what extent do you agree? And in the bullet points it asks you how the writer creates particular effects, and that how tells us that this is a language question in disguise. So remember, it's always the second part of the source, always has a line reference, it's always to what extent do you agree? You can partially agree, fully agree, disagree or both. And it's a methods question in disguise. So you want to identify devices, language or structure in the quotations that you select to support your conclusions. So I always like to think of this as like a burger or a sandwich. Effectively, your normal peel, where you're analysing a language or structure device, is the juicy middle part. You still need that part, but you want to sandwich each peel between an evaluation stem linking to the keywords, and your opinion about whether or not you agree with that keyword and that idea, that statement, and then summed up using a therefore stem, because this helps you to steer back to the keywords in the question. So I might start with an evaluation stem like, firstly, I agree with the statement because, or firstly, I agree to a large extent because, or I agree to a certain extent because. Then I've got my normal peel. The writer uses device, quote, analysis, language, same as normal, my peel structure. And then I use a therefore, it is clear that, and I'm going to use those keywords to steer myself back to the evaluation and show whether I agree or disagree. So if you do that consistently, that's going to get you at least a 5+. Do it really well, in a complex way, picking out specific devices, using judicious quotations, being perceptive and detailed about the effect, and it's going to move further up. Remember, it's all about the analysis as much as it is the identification of the devices, and the analysis needs to be specific and detailed. It's almost like an explain, language process until you can't say anything else about that quotation that you have really pulled apart to explore that statement you have been given. Okay, so that's what it looks like, and you're going to do that approximately 3 to 4 times. 3 is fine, 4 is probably even better because of the length of question and the tariff of marks available, of 20 marks. Okay, so here are some evaluation phrases that you could use to start that process. Think of this as like the top of your bun before you go into your peel paragraph, the bit that's sandwiched in the middle. So we always start with an evaluation phrase. So these are some that you could use. Which word is missing? This is a moment here for you to pause and think about which word might fit into that space. The number of dashes at the bottom is the number of letters in the word that is missing. So pause now and write out those evaluation phrases. Can you fill the gaps? Okay, so when you're ready, let's go through those answers. I partially agree because, to some extent I agree because, to a certain extent I agree because, to a large extent I agree because. It could be argued that. However, I partially disagree because, on the other hand, I think that. So if you look, the ones at the top are agreeing, but these are more evaluative. I partially agree. To a certain extent, I agree. However, on the other hand, and by doing that, you're becoming more critical by weighing it up on both sides. Let's now have a look at the other part of the paragraph after your peel paragraph, and this is your therefore sentences. So here, this is where we lead it back to the keyword and we sum up our argument that has been presented in the peel paragraph about what we feel in terms of whether we agree or disagree. We've evaluated the evidence and now we're just steering back to the keyword of the question every time we finish one of these paragraphs. So again, same process, pause, what might be those missing words? Write out those therefore phrases with the word inserted in. Okay, so some answers. Therefore, I agree that. Therefore, it is clear that. Therefore, it could be argued that. Therefore, an overall impression of something to do with the keyword is created. Therefore, I am in agreement with this statement because. And today's extract text that we're going to have a look at is Jurassic Park, written by Michael Crichton. And it is a 1990 science fiction novel. You might have seen the film. It is about an amusement park which genetically engineers extinct dinosaurs for the pleasure and enjoyment of guests to come and see, almost like a zoo. And it presents the collapse of that amusement park and the devastating consequences of playing God with these species and trying to control these dinosaurs that are so powerful. Now we're going to start by looking at movie analysis first of all, looking at a moving image. Now I find this useful because this helps us to get into that mindset of evaluating a statement that you are given, and we often have reviews of films in the same way that we have a review of the text where we're given a statement about it to agree or disagree with. So here we've got a statement for you to evaluate. The moment where the velociraptors enter the kitchen with the children is tense and terrifying. I felt anxious that the children would not get away safely. To what extent do you agree? So let's have a look for the keywords. Tense, terrifying, I felt anxious. So those are the keywords that you were evaluating. Is it tense this moment? Is it terrifying or not? Do you feel anxious or not when you watch this? To what extent do you agree? And remember, be critical. You can say, I agree partially. However, I also disagree because of this detail. So what you want to do as you watch this is to put 1, 2, 3, whether you agree or disagree and why and what your evidence is. Whether you agree or disagree, why, what your evidence is. Whether you agree or disagree, why and what your evidence is. Try and come up with something, because you want to consider all 3 keywords, for tense, terrifying and anxious. Find something which you could connect to those. Now there's a YouTube link there, but if you search for Jurassic Park kitchen scene, it will come up on YouTube and you can watch that same clip. So I'll give you a moment now to pause this, to load that in a separate window, to watch the clip and to make your notes. Okay, so when you're ready, we'll go through an example. These are some of the things that you might have noticed. And again, be tentative. Don't say, I absolutely think this or I absolutely think that. Be confident to say, well, I partially agree. But then equally weigh up both sides. I also disagree, because that's being critical. That's thinking more deeply and being perceptive. And that's what's in the top band of the mark scheme for this kind of question when you're analysing an extract. So, is it tense? Is it terrifying? Are you anxious that the children would not get away? To a large extent, I agree that this scene is tense. Notice the things in red are the use of the keywords. Because as the velociraptors enter the kitchen, the children's whispering and frightened facial expressions emphasise their fear of what is approaching. The director uses the slow, deliberate movements of the creature to build tension and anxiety. I also agree, strengthening my argument here, that the scene makes me feel anxious, as the children are barely out of sight of the velociraptor and could be caught at any moment. The clattering kitchenware and utensils create a potential for noise and mistakes, so that we know the children are always just inches away from being caught. Furthermore, I also agree to some extent that the scene is terrifying due to the way in which the velociraptor is presented. The director displays many close-up images of claws and teeth alongside the sound of the animal roaring ferociously to really frighten the audience. However, this is where we become critical and we think about the extent to which we really agree. However, it could be argued to a certain extent, that's tentative, notice it could be, to a certain extent, that the scene is not entirely terrifying because the velociraptors are not clever animals and can easily be outsmarted by the children. The children work together to protect each other and hatch a plan, and the audience feel reassured by the final minute that the children will get away. Okay, so that's what it might look like. Now that's a bit of film analysis. We're now going to move this into a text analysis, an extract from the novel. So read again, line 17 to the end is what we're told. A reviewer said, this section of the text really shows how strong and lethal the velociraptors are physically. It makes it clear how dangerous they could be. To what extent do you agree? So line 17 to the end, so I want to focus just on that part. We'll read the full extract, but then there's a shorter section that I want you to focus in on. In the exam, you'd need to line off, rule off that section, box it off and say, well, this is the part I'm looking at, to make sure that you don't select from the wrong area, because remember this is part of the reading test, that you're reading the questions closely. A reviewer said this section really shows how strong and lethal the velociraptors are physically. So the keywords strong, lethal. It makes clear how dangerous they could be. So are they strong and lethal physically, and are they dangerous? To what extent do you agree? So let's have a look now at the extract. In this extract, the man in charge of the dinosaurs is contemplating the dangers of the creatures they have created. Now this is the first part of the extract. This is actually up to line 17, so you don't need to select anything from here. This is just a bit of context, background of the overall extract, because you would have read the whole extract for the earlier questions. It was Muldoon's view that some dinosaurs were too dangerous to be kept in a park setting. In part, the danger existed because they still knew so little about the animals. For example, Nobody even suspected the Dilophosaurs were poisonous until they were observed hunting island rats on the island, biting the rodents and then stepping back to wait for them to die. And even then, nobody suspected the Dilophosaurs could spit until one of the handlers was almost blinded by spitting venom. After that, Hammond had agreed to study Dilophosaur venom, which was found to contain 7 different toxic enzymes. It was also discovered that the Dilophosaurs could spit a distance of 50 feet. Since this raised the possibility that a guest in a car might be blinded, management decided to remove the poison sacs. The vets had tried twice on 2 different animals without success. No one knew whether poison was being secreted, and no one would ever know until an autopsy was performed on a Dilophosaur, and management would not allow one to be killed. So this is the section now, line 17 to the end, where you want to think, where is there evidence that the velociraptors are lethal, physically strong, dangerous? To what extent do you agree? Muldoon worried even more about the velociraptors. They were instinctive hunters and never passed up prey. They killed even when they weren't hungry. They killed for the pleasure of killing. They were swift, strong runners and astonishing jumpers. They had lethal claws on all 4 limbs. One swipe of a forearm would disembowel a man, spilling his guts out. And they had powerful tearing jaws that ripped flesh instead of biting it. They were far more intelligent than the other dinosaurs, and they seemed to be natural cage breakers. Every zoo expert knew that certain animals were especially likely to get free of their cages. Some, like monkeys and elephants, could undo cage doors. Others, like wild pigs, were unusually intelligent and could lift gate fasteners with their snouts. But who would suspect that the giant armadillo was a notorious cage breaker? Or the moose? Yet a moose was almost as skillful with its snout as an elephant with his trunk. Moose were always getting free. They had a talent for it. And so did velociraptors. Okay, so you want to find 3 things that make you agree or disagree. You want to select 3 quotations with devices within them. Okay, look out for devices because remember this is a language question in disguise. So find 3 quotes with devices that make you agree or disagree with the statement. Try and find something for lethal, try and find something for strong physically, try and find something for dangerous. Remember the word lethal means causing death. Dangerous might just mean causing injury or causing peril. Strong physically, we're referring to their bodies being strong and powerful. Okay, so pause there, select for yourself 3 quotes with devices, 3 reasons why you agree or disagree. And things for you to look for again, agree or disagree and with which keyword, what's the evidence, the quote, what's the device, the writer's method being used. Make sure you do that process before you write. I'll redisplay now the text and we'll talk through it. Okay, so some of the things that you might have identified. Worried even more about the velociraptors. They were far more intelligent. So here we've got even more, far more. The use of comparatives shows that these are the most dangerous animals. If we think about the dangers that other animals in the park present, the handlers are even more worried about the velociraptors and their potential for being vicious and clever animals. You could look instinctive hunters, astonishing jumpers, strong runners, natural cage breakers. There's a pattern of pre-modification here, pre-modifiers using adjectives, and all of these emphasize their physical strength, their physical adaptations, their instincts, their power, their speed. You might identify a semantic field: hunters, prey, killed, lethal claws. A semantic field of predators or predatory imagery, prey, killed, claws. All of these show their lethal potential, their potential as killers. They killed for the pleasure of killing. We've actually got a repetition of the word kill. Killing is their main motivation. One swipe of a forearm would disembowel a man, spilling his guts out. Really violent, hyperbolic imagery here. So violent imagery and hyperbole, spilling his guts, horrible, visceral. Shocking imagery, showing how lethal they are, how easily they could cause death and dismemberment. Tearing jaws, ripped flesh, biting it. The dynamic verbs are all about aggression and strength as well. These rhetorical questions I think are interesting. I've identified these because lots of you often find it easiest to identify rhetorical questions. Who would suspect that the giant armadillo was a notorious cage breaker, or the moose? Now, these aren't directly about the velociraptors, but you can use this rhetorical question to talk about the velociraptors. The rhetorical questions make a comparison to other weaker animals and emphasize how if even weaker animals can be a threat in terms of escape, less threatening animals can be some kind of threat in terms of escape. Imagine the chaos and the turmoil if one of these was to get free. So that emphasizes the danger through that rhetorical question. So I know it's not directly about the velociraptors, but it does help us to talk about the idea of them being dangerous through that comparison to other animals that aren't typical predators. And then finally, and so did velociraptors. All of this comparison with the rhetorical questions brings it back round to the velociraptors with that parataxis, with that short sentence to confirm the threat, to confirm the danger. It ends structurally with that final parataxis to emphasize just how lethal these animals could be. Okay, so those are just some things that you might have identified. So make sure you've selected your 3 or 4 favourite quotations, the ones that you would link to lethal, to strong physically, to dangerous, ready to write up, because you need something for all of those. You must be steered by the keywords. So when we write this up, this is our method. You'll recognise this from our infographic. We want to do this 3 to 4 times. You'll notice there's all of our analytical verbs on there. It's important to make inferences about what it suggests about the velociraptors. It's important to analyse the effect on the reader, what it encapsulates, what it heightens, what it intensifies, what it evokes about these animals, what it makes us think and feel. But remember, you can also talk about structural devices, so you could also use the structural effect stems as well if you wanted to, because it's methods in general. So we start, remember, the top of our burger bun, the overview statement, the evaluation phrase. To a certain extent, to a large extent, to some extent, I agree because. Give your reason and link to the keyword. The writer does this by using, we name the device, so it might be a semantic field of predators or predatory imagery. It might be use of dynamic verbs. It might be the pre-modifiers and the adjectives, whichever part you want to explore. Give your quotation from where it appears. Remember, if you can, embed it. For example, the velociraptors are described as, or the way in which they attack is described as. Make sure you embed it if you can. If not, remember the examiner is just looking for the quotation. Explore the effect using either the structural effect stems here, the analytical verb stems on the right hand side, or the verbs of inference. What does it do? Why does it make them seem lethal, dangerous, etc.? Name a smaller device if you can, or just word. Requote detail, pick out a single word or a reference. Give a micro quotation, single words or a couple of single words, and again explore the specific effects and connotations of those words. What are the connotations of ripping, tearing, for instance? What are the connotations of using the word disembowel? Why is that repulsive and shocking? Why is the writer use that to emphasize the strength of these animals and the danger that they pose? Okay, and then finally, when you've done your peel as much as you can, you've explored it with as many layers of inference and detail as you can. Therefore, I agree that the velociraptors appear dangerous because. Therefore, I agree that the velociraptors are lethal physically. Therefore, I agree that they are strong physically because, and you're just going to sum up your argument. And that whole process, from the overview statement, the evaluation statement, all the way down to the therefore, you're going to repeat 3 times. And when you've done that, self-assessment here, think about the mark scheme. You could use the code to mark this yourself, use your red pen. Evaluation phrases, so anywhere that you've said to a certain extent, to a large extent, I agree because, however, I also partially disagree, you get marks for those. So give yourself a tick every time you've used one of those. Put EP for evaluation phrase. Tick every time you've used a quote or a micro quote, tick and put Q. Tick every time you've used a specific device, either language or structural. Might be the final parataxis on its own as a very short paragraph, that's structural, but it might be something like the semantic field, that's language, any device you like for this question. And the effect on the reader, tick and put E for effect, so that you can self-regulate and see where your strengths are. And then check against your GCSE skills checklist for this lesson. Give yourself a mark out of 10 for each area of the criteria based on your self-marking. Have you got all of those areas of the mark scheme? And if not, based on those statements on the right hand side, it's a good idea now to set yourself a target. If you found it hard to give your opinion and the reasons to support it, that's your target. If you found it hard to identify and use devices in your answer, that's your target. If you found it hard to use micro quotations, those judicious quotations, and to talk about things like semantic fields or dynamic verbs and patterns across the text, that could be a target. If you found it challenging to write about specific effect, again, that's your target. Your home learning work this week is to complete a full evaluation question, so you need to make sure that you've done that answer in full. Remember that each peel needs an evaluation stem and a therefore statement at the start and the end. There is a feedback video going online, and the link will be on the VLE, so you can easily find that. But it's also in the YouTube channel, so you can just search for it, feedback, year 10, on the structural analysis based on the opening of the Beekeeper of Aleppo. Check the quality of your own analysis from last lesson against this. Take a look at the additional evaluation question. I've put an extract up from a novel called Shadows on the Nile, and there is a whole paper there, so you can have a look at all 4 questions, but you must attempt question 4 this week. But if you wanted to do the rest of the paper just to see how good your skills are in terms of analysing an unseen text totally independently, do so. But I want you to go through the question 4 process that we've learned today. Read the extract, find the keywords in the question, find 3 quotations where you agree or disagree with that statement with devices, and write up using the method that's on the previous slides. And finally, as an extension, you need to know the method for this paper because it's always the same. So produce some cue cards or revision notes on the method you need to use for each kind of question on paper 1 section A. Make sure you include how many paragraphs, how many minutes, what kind of devices to look out for, top tips, might be top analytical phrases that you might want to use. Look back at the method infographics and the lessons we've done over the past 3 weeks to help you. That will have all of that information. Okay. Well done once again for your work on another live lesson, and there'll be another one up for you very soon next week. Well done.